Hey friends, today I am going to be doing my March TBR. I'm pretty excited because in March we have the Trope-ical Readathon, which is one of my favorite readathons, and I have more books picked out than I could ever read. I really love doing this readathon. I think I've been doing it for the last 3 years, basically, since I started BookTube. This was one of the first ones I found to join in with, and I have really enjoyed doing it. So there are quite a few prompts. I usually join Team Fantasy. I almost did Team Sci-Fi this year, but I decided to stick with Fantasy. And so I'm gonna tell you the prompt, tell you the book I'm reading, and I'm gonna do them in the order I'm gonna read them in, because there's no way I'm gonna get through all these books. I think there are 15 books, and that's just not gonna happen. So you'll know which ones I'm going to prioritize, I suppose. 6 of these I have physical copies of. 2 of these I plan on doing audiobook. The rest I'm going to get either from the library or get them on my Kindle. There are 2 that my library doesn't have, so I'm going to have to decide if I want to buy them or maybe just do a whole different book. I'm not sure. Okay, so the first one I'm going to get on audiobook, because I'll start that March 1st, basically. I plan on doing 2. So for the first half of March, one of the prompts is to do either an audiobook or an ebook. So I just kind of got to pick basically a freebie. One of the ones on my wish list is the Davenports. I forget who it's by. I'm going to put all the ones I don't have kind of up here. This is supposed to basically be like Bridgerton-esque era, very romantic. So I don't know much about it, but I do love that genre, that style, and I don't get much of it. So I'm excited to check this one out. My first book, it's gonna be a Kindle book I got through NetGalley called The Golden Spoon. And this is like a Great British Baking Show murder mystery. And I feel like I couldn't ask for a better combination of things. I love the Great British Baking Show. So yeah, another one I don't know much about. I just know that it has to do with like a baking competition and a murder mystery, and I thought it would be great. I'm putting this under my recommendation. I feel like it's definitely a stretch, but it came from NetGalley, so NetGalley is recommending it to me. I'll go ahead and get my other audiobook out of the way. This is for a series prompt, and I'm going to be reading the second book in the Shadow of the Fox. I listened to the first book on an audiobook and really enjoyed the romance that was building. It ended on definitely a kind of cliffhanger, and I feel like I'm excited to jump back in before I kind of forget. This follows a kitsune who is trying to protect a scroll after her temple burns down, and she gets the help of someone who is also trying to find the scroll. And so they're kind of deceiving each other. Both of them know they're hiding things from each other, but they don't necessarily know what. The first one ends with a pretty epic battle that has very serious consequences on all fronts. And so I feel like it'll be really fun to get back into this series. After I read my book about baking and mystery, I am going to dive into my mythology trope prompt and read Lore Volume 3. I've had this on my shelf since it came out and somehow haven't picked it up because I've been trying to stay true to my TBR, and this never made it onto that list. So the second I saw a mythology trope, I knew I was going to put this there, and I knew I was going to prioritize it. This is one of those books I love. I love the arts. It's beautifully done. It does a really good job of telling the Hades and Persephone story in a way that feels unique and beautiful. It's a modern retelling, and so they're in kind of a cityscape and they're going to clubs and stuff like that. I cannot recommend this series enough if you like mythology. And of course, with mythology comes a lot of trigger warnings, so definitely keep an eye out for those if you plan on reading these, but cannot recommend enough. For book number 4, the prompt was Gas Lamp Fantasy, which I had to look up because I didn't really know what that meant. One of the recommendations was A Darker Shade of Magic. I have already read that, but I have not read book 2. So I decided that would be a great chance to keep going in this series. I really loved book 1. I love the red, black, and white color scheme. This follows Kel, who can travel between different Londons. There's a gray London, a white London, a black London, and a red London. And each one has its own unique things, while some things are common throughout. Like he may go to a pub that is a pub in each of the Londons, but maybe the pub has a different name in each of the Londons. He can travel between all of them, so he's kind of the communication between all of them. He helps trade, and he's one of a few people that still has that ability, from what I understand. He's not supposed to bring things between worlds, but definitely does some smuggling, and that is what gets him in trouble in book number 1. A Darker Shade of Magic was the first V.E. Schwab book I ever read. I know she has a ton. I did enjoy it. I really want to dig deeper into this series to see how much of her other series I want to dig into. The next prompt I'm going for is a dystopian apocalyptic prompt, and I have put this, I think, on my TBR every single time for this prompt. So I'm pushing it up towards the top of the list this time. This will be book number 4 that I read. So I feel like 4 books to read is pretty reasonable, especially when one of them so far is a graphic novel. This is The Sand Castle Empire by Kayla Olson. The back says Maze Runner meets Lost. What I know is that in this post-apocalyptic land, there's a girl named Eden who is trying to find sanctuary, which is basically the only neutral ground left in this world. Her parents were killed by a group called the Wolf Pack, and so she's trying to get to this island to basically get away from them and find a way to survive and have those freedoms. This has been on my shelf for so long, I feel kind of guilty. This time is going to be the time. Prompt number 6 is a book published before 2000. So of course, I'm going to be working on my list of classics. I decided to go with In Cold Blood. I definitely listen to true crime podcasts, but I've never read a book like that before. I don't know if it will be too much for me or if it'll be something I enjoy as much as the podcasts. I do know the story behind this book, In Cold Blood. It has to do with a family that was murdered in Kansas. I grew up in Kansas, but I didn't ever learn about this until I started listening to true crime. So I think it'll be really interesting. It's also kind of like the first true crime book ever published. I feel like some people say it did not do a good job of staying true to the narrative, and some people disagree. So I'm definitely excited to compare it to what I know about the story so far. Okay, book number 7, I'm definitely cheating, and I would guess that I might get to this one, I might not, but the prompt is a book set in another country, and this book, Good Omens, is set in England. This is by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I feel like it would be hard not to know what this book is about, or to not have heard of this book before. The TV show has been pretty popular, and both of the authors are pretty popular. So this is another one I've had on my shelves for a while. It's another one I've had on this TBR before. We'll see if I get to this one. I feel like this could be a stretch, but I'm really going to try and get some serious reading done in March. I do have spring break. I don't know what my spring break plans are yet, but maybe it'll just be reading. Prompt number 8 is a borrowed book, and I bought Horror Store by Grady Hendrix for one of my friends for her birthday, and she really loved it, so I thought I should read it too. I read Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires with that same friend and some others in a book club group, and enjoyed it. Was surprised by how much I enjoyed it because it's still a pretty new genre to me. So when she read it and said she enjoyed it, I was excited to dig back in. It's supposed to look like an IKEA catalog, and it basically has to do with a group of workers that have to stay overnight at their basically IKEA store because strange things are happening and they need to figure out what's going on. So it feels short. I don't know how long it'll take me to read, but hopefully I will get to it. Anything past this is really going to be a stretch for me, but book number 9 is a boarding school prompt, and a while ago I read A Spy in the House. It's a YA mystery series by Y.S. Lee, and so it does have a girl that goes to a boarding school, and book number 2 is called The Body at the Tower, I believe. I can get this on my Kindle from my library, and definitely a way I'm trying to keep pushing series completion because I always struggle with that, and this is one of those series that I don't want to just fall off. I did enjoy it. I don't think it was one of my top reads, but I'm definitely interested to keep reading it, and so I need to make sure I push for that. Can I tell you anything about it? No. I did look up to confirm that it has to do with boarding school, and I can check that off, and that is about it. Book number 10 is the absent parent trope. For this, I usually go with the series of unfortunate events, but I'm switching it up. I'm going to put Rise. This is one of the books I can't find at my library, so I could be defaulting to the next series of unfortunate event, but this is book 2 in a duology. I read the first one pretty recently. I would love to just check that off my list. The first book has to do with 3 girls who are kind of scooped up because their father happens to be the king, their illegitimate heirs. The prince has just died. They all have secrets relating to the throne, and the king is about to die too. I definitely wanted to jump back into book number 2. Another prompt is multiple POC characters. I have read Binti 1 and 2, so I thought Binti number 3 would be a good book to put here. It has been a minute since I've read these. I remember enjoying them. They're short little novellas about Binti, who is going off to college, and her family kind of wasn't prepared for her to make that leap because no one from her home has gone before. On the way there, her ship is invaded by basically these crazy alien species, and things definitely take a turn. Book 2 is definitely different, and so I have no idea what book 3 is or how it's going to fit into the feel of book 1 and book 2. Book 13 is a book called 8 Perfect Murders, and the trope was a bookish theme book. I literally know nothing about this. I was trying to look up a book about books, and this was one of them that sounded a little bit different. It has to do with a writer who publishes murder mysteries, and someone starts committing the murders in her book, if I remember right. I've heard of this trope before, but never read a book based on that, so I think it would be fun. Okay, I think 3 more. One of the next prompt is a retelling. So Girls Made of Snow and Glass. This is a Snow White retelling, if I remember right. This is another one I have had on my shelves forever and had for a Trope-ical Readathon prompt before and not gotten to. The back says, Mina, the stepmother queen, Lynette, the beautiful princess, 2 young women doomed to be rivals from the start. I always love a good retelling. I haven't read very many Snow White retellings aside from the Lunar Chronicles, so I'm not sure if that would be my favorite. Snow White was not necessarily my favorite Disney princess by any means, but a good retelling is still a good retelling. Book 14, if I get to it, is definitely another one I had to look up for this trope, coming of age. I don't feel like coming of age books are in my wheelhouse. I usually try and stay away from them, honestly, because I just don't enjoy reading that. So that's why it's a little bit lower on my list of priorities, but the book I found for this was Kite Runner. I've never read Kite Runner. I honestly don't know anything about it, but I know it is a huge classic, and people always talk really highly of it. I didn't know it was a coming-of-age book, but it was on one of the lists on Goodreads that I looked up. I don't think I'll make it to this one, but Kite Runner is definitely a book I want to read eventually, even if it's not during this readathon. The last prompt is actually just the team fantasy book. There were 2 options, and the one I want to go with is The Last of the Flower Bride, but it's another one that I actually couldn't find at my library, so I would have to buy. That's why it's lower on this list as well. But it has to do with girls who are all trained from birth to basically be the brides of royalty, high in political power. And I just always love a good royals trope. It sounds like there's going to be some deviousness in this book. I think it'll be up my alley for sure if I ever get to it. I think if I don't get to it during this Trope-ical Readathon, I don't know that it would necessarily be on my list. I haven't heard anyone talking about it, but maybe people will start reading it and picking it up. I think it's a relatively new book. Okay, here is my stack. These are the books I'm going to be reading along with several others, hopefully, fingers crossed. There are 15 books total for these prompts, so I'm excited to see how many I actually get through. Let me know if you're doing this readathon and what team you're on. If you want to look into it, it is down below. I definitely recommend it. It is always well done. And I will see y'all later. Have a great week and do some great reading. Bye, friends.